created everything from the beginning of time. Everything that we all started in the ocean, every being that we know now started in the ocean, and she kept building upon that greater and greater and greater. And I think it's that a man acknowledged that as well.
I've always thought of the ocean as being the womb of Mother Earth anyway. So, like, to hear those words, to read those words, like, but of course, that makes so much sense, right? It was a womb that birthed forth life.
What comes to mind is men are women too.
Can you say more about that? Men are women too?
Well, everything comes from this genetic architecture of the feminine and the female waters. And so not just actually women birth men, but also historically the female consciousness created men consciously. So they're a female creation and therefore part of the she body, the goddess body.
Yeah, I can't find the quote at the moment and I wouldn't be able to remember the details, but I remember when I first read this first chapter how just interesting and surprising it was to learn that like all in the embryo and human development that it starts as female and it's not until later in the gestation process that masculine property begins to come in. And then like the story of how like once the embryo starts becoming male that it actually needs to like hide itself in order to survive in the womb. It was really interesting.
I just keep thinking about Greek mythology and Gaia creating from the sea, Hesiod's theogony, and that it all comes from chaos and then begins. But hers is without intercourse, like she just produces out of the sea.
Right. So these codes are just hidden everywhere and in plain sight and all around us for us to see and witness and understand in different ways. Ariane says, makes me think of the womb and the amniotic fluid, which is a really beautiful way to put it and also echoes what Julia also just shared around that piece. Anyone else? What does it mean if in the beginning we were all created female?
So this motif of the source mother being the waters is repeated in many different cultures, many different mythologies. It's all over the place. The modern Hindus have it, and it's in the Bible. It's one of the arguments I make that the opening lines of Genesis, God created the heaven and the earth, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the deep waters. That those waters, that's the mother. God didn't create the waters. He's hovering over them. He emerged out of them, and they're taking her name away. And this is one of the theological things that they're doing, the biblical writers are doing, of getting rid of the mother is they identify her, but they don't name her. And by taking away her name, they're taking away, like, this is one of the blows that they throw to take away her powers. But she's right there in the opening lines of Genesis, but without a name. It's right there. And it's deliberate.
I was inspired to say that it evokes the realization of long-standing deception of the story and the cover-up of seeing some of these long-standing historical and biological perspectives, truths, standings that are being covered up for very intentional reasons.
Can you speak more on like what you think those intentional reasons are about like why that suppression and hidden knowledge is happening?
I say like that the book really describes this extremely well. So I feel like I'm not going to describe it as well as the book is, but um, to me, there's I don't really understand the true source of why the male dominance factor has really wanted to take over. But that is kind of what we live in our world right now, is that there is just that's just kind of a factual thing in the history that we're coming out of. And I believe there's a power hungry, control mechanism that is operating, and I think it's coming through the male version of humans that really wants to um, suppress the female, because females, the mother, etc., that we represent is extremely powerful. So, and that I really truly believe if things were as they were a while back in history, where it was maybe matriarchal or more female leaders, etc., we would be living in a truly much more peaceful world.
I do
Yeah,
feel like I feel like
beautiful.
the purpose of this world also is like the pain and like the things that aren't beautiful, because this isn't heaven. Like this is duality and heaven and hell, and like male and female, and like the purpose, or one of the purposes of the human experience, is learning by like losing things. So like losing the respect for the feminine, we're deeper learning the actual meaning and remembering what it is, like what the feminine is, and because like women have the portal of God's consciousness through the womb, like I think that is why like the feminine is under attack, and weakened, and to forget that we're the creators of this earth, and for men to forget that and to see what happens on this earth when we lose that. That's how we truly know what we have, and what we even have to strive to get back.
Right. And this is where the authors also say women is not comprehended as an evolutionary or evolutionizing creature. She is treated rather as an auxiliary to a male dominated evolutionary process. She mothers him, she mates him, she cooks his dinner, she follows around after him, picking up his loose rocks. He evolves, she follows. He evolutionizes, she adjusts. So it's like that attitude that it just penetrated our entire culture.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you were saying. I was wondering so often why the feminine force created men and patriarchy on the long term. And it's, maybe it is to remember herself or give herself a new name, or at all give herself a name, because you need two subjects to trying to communicate to each other that have some kind of otherness in order to get a name in the first place. So maybe that was the reason why there was this mutation or like this change and going away from kind of the cloning of the female DNA into more diversity. Yeah, maybe one option. I don't know.
Something I'm reflecting on and considering is how
Where's the anxiety?
we all have the capacity
Oh no.
to have these quote unquote feminine qualities, but
I think everyone's on mute now, Debbie.
This one's
There you go.
better.
okay, thank you.
I can't take this anymore.
Yeah, so
This one's
you
too
might
short,
hear my
but this
kid's
one
tablet
too
in the
long.
background, so I
What did I do?
apologize for that. Yeah, she's watching something on there, so like, yeah. But I'm reflecting on how like we all have the capacity to be a creator, a destroyer, and how we all have this capacity to have the quote unquote divine feminine qualities, but how it's the dominance of the male eccentricities and how they're centered and like how that is like either in some way beat out of us like these important or beat out of like boy children or cis boys and like or just these qualities that are lost due to the violence of the culture. So like thinking about how like it's not we're not born to hate. We're not born to do these types of isms and phobias and harms, but like it's taught due to the violence of the male dominance.
Ashe. Anna, did you want to share something? You had a hand raised? Okay. I was just gonna share, this is such an interesting place that this conversation is going, and I'm pretty sure that this is addressed later in the book a little bit more about like the why and the how, around how patriarchy came to rise and matriarchy came to fall. And I think that like a part of that reason, which we'll get into later as we find that chapter, I'm not sure what it is like there was like a jealousy of the woman power, and the men being more physically dominant were able to assert a physical dominance over women. And I think there's also something to say, like Julia was saying, like the more like psychological aspect of the divine feminine also having some part to play in it. And I've had, my own conversations with the Divine Mother about that and about the ways that, that what I heard from her was that it was also, there was like this betrayal of the divine feminine against herself, and that we became subservient to the dominance of the patriarchy, that we played a part in that shifting of the tides and the handing over of power. And that's something that we have to reckon with now, and like, how are we going to come back and reclaim that power that for some reason we gave up? I think this transitions well into like chapter 2 that kind of like lays out the patriarchy a little bit more in some of the ways that it has twisted reality. And the whole chapter about Marx and the matriarchy is a really good example like of how men, out of their jealousy really and admiration for the women, took the culture of women and matriarchy and twisted it to be something else, which we see the patriarchy do with many, many different things, like taking the root of something that is good and taking it and twisting it to be something else. And one thing is like that it talks about is the aspect of dualism and how the patriarchy seeks to actually create more duality. And I think that I'll read this quote that spells it out nicely. It's on page 16 if anyone's with their book. For this is precisely what patriarchy sets out to do, to split material production from spiritual experience, science from magic, medicine from herbal knowledge, and psychic seasonal environment, sexuality from the sacred, art from craft, astronomy from astrology, and language from poetry. And then later on, it goes on to say, patriarchy divides life into higher and lower categories, labeled spirit versus nature or mind versus matter. And typically in this alienated symbolism, the superior spirit mind is male, while the inferior nature matter is female. This false dualistic symbolism arises from an enforced order of male domination. And so I think that this is really interesting, and I think that it would be interesting to hear maybe a little bit more about how we see the kind of the heart of things being torn out by the patriarchy to create these kind of structures of the world. And it goes on later to explain that the kind of reason for this dualism is to like be able to separate heart from Mother Earth, for example, and be able to rape and pillage the earth for resources because we no longer see heart or value in the earth itself. So yeah, so curious what that evokes in people, that thought, and then yeah, and maybe like how we can kind of like reckon with that and heal that and move into more like holism.
It's really a huge question, right? I mean, like it's so overwhelming, and especially if you're neurodivergent, that's a really overwhelming question. Um, I think of course it starts small with, you know, like individual conversations and, you know, relationships and those sorts of things. But I think placing a lot of emphasis and helping raise awareness about the earth and nature and, you know, its importance, I think is one of the biggest ways that we help to sort of raise a consciousness around the importance and the nourishment that comes through feminine energy, as well as the fact that feminine energy is inherently more like embodied, somatic, visceral, pleasurable than this sort of like cerebral, transcendent kind of energy that is not just patriarchal, but also that's very like monotheistic, where they have dominion over as opposed to stewardship to. But that's just, you know, the teeny tip of the iceberg, because like we just that topic alone, we'd be here for years.
Thank you.
I agree. It was just such a huge, I really liked what you said, by the way, but it's such a huge topic. It's almost like the second you asked, what can we start to do? Everyone was sort of like, oh my gosh, well, I don't even know. But it is sort of one of those things, I think, where you do kind of have to be in the mindset of just because they don't understand doesn't make the truth any less true. Because, yeah, over time, I think people will start to understand. Because I think some of more important people, important people get it now, but it's going to become, I don't know, maybe more digestible or relatable, but that's a huge, huge question.
I was simply just getting up because I was just studying this book. I can recommend this. It's called The Death of Nature. It was published before The Great Cosmic Mother, I believe, a little bit earlier, and it just describes in all detail just this transition that you mentioned in the beginning of chapter 2. Like this split into dualisms. And I don't know. I think it's a lifelong learning how to live with it, because it's kind of the wrong state of consciousness, right? Where it's kind of like a patriarchal matrix, and then you like live in it, and you know it's wrong, and you know that the self is just one part of the big. So I think compassion is like the bridge to like really understand that I am another you and you are another me, and yeah, we're just aspects of each other. And without spiritually bypassing like real life problems, but having compassion. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you guys are right. It is a huge question. And this like heart of compassion, this piece of compassion, I actually feel is such actually a gift of the mother, and like a gift of her return and what she wants for us, and is like the answer to so many of these big hows, you know, how are we going to overcome the violence happening upon the earth right now? And I think that love is the answer, and love is always the answer, as cliche as it may sound. And I think that finding ways to find that is so it. And I was saying it all. I also, yeah, I think that I also I've always been like a big thinker, and I think that having these pods to be able to have these bigger conversations on and tackle these bigger questions on like how are we going to build a better world together, you know? And like I think that it requires looking at what's so broken and then like really imagining like how can we do it differently, you know? And like I will share this one quote that comes later in the chapter that feels like a little bit of a seed of what's possible, a seed of what could be next. And it's moving towards holism, you know, and this idea of holism and how we can become more integrated in our belief systems. And it says, a truly human politics must study the entire history of the world's religions and spiritual beliefs. It must try to return to or move towards spiritual systems that are harmonious with all our visions of creative communal life. Because this is what is missing under both of the competing world powers, is a creative communal life. So I think that that's one direction that this book offers us in what it means to begin to tackle what it means to transcend this dualism and taking heart out of the matter. Is how can we actually integrate our beliefs and our creative visions with each other, cross-culturally, in our personal relationships, all over the place. Just a thought.
But I wonder if we like if we overcome duality, then if we will leave Earth, because what if that takes us into like the 4D, where like Earth seems to serve the purpose of the 3D, just as there's like lower dimensions serving like their purpose, and like, and what if that's just of this planet? Like what if that's the gift of the lesson of this planet? And sometimes it can almost be distracting to like want to change this planet and what it gives us, you know. And but it's important to like learn it within ourselves, because you know like our souls can go to all these different places. But I just wonder that like, you know, once we figure that out, either like independently or as a whole, if you know next time we'll wake up somewhere else for like whatever the next purpose of learning is.
That is incredibly deep. It's like that is like the if we get rid of the patriarchy, we basically find heaven on earth. That was the picture I was getting as you were speaking. Like
And then
that's
Earth
actually,
has no purpose.
yeah. I
And
mean,
then you know the reason why we come to Earth is because like there's no challenges in heaven, so you can't really ascend very high in heaven. You're already in the ascension, so we come here to get wrecked, you know. So, but because it offers either a deep falling or a deep ascension that we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of what you said before too. It like ties into this idea that part of the human experience, or one of the most important aspects of the human experience, is learning and evolving, and you can't really do that without loss and change and things moving. I just think that is a really, really interesting thought.
Well, with you, like just jumping right off of what you said, Katie, if you observe nature, then you see that there is death and decay. You see the way nature actually has a beautiful community, right? Like the dead or fallen trees, often still supported by the live trees, and just like the live trees are okay with that. They're not upset that they're still holding
Yes.
dead. They're dead. They're holding their dead, right along the little sapling is right there. Like all of the things, all of the change and the weather and everything. Those are the metaphors for living a human life. We're not separate from it, but we experience it here more than here. Like, I'm holding my womb as well. That we're, and that's part of how we grow and evolve. We're seeing that like, it's kind of exactly the same thing. It's inherent in nature that we do these things, we go through these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And on this exact vein, and it's really interesting because I don't know whose sound is doing that.
I think maybe if
but it takes it more into the liminal space that reminds me really of a lot of psychedelic journeys. And this is on page 29 if you have the book. But they, being the patriarchy, has virtually defined mature mindedness as a state of permanent alienation, the I chronically differentiated from the all. What this amounts to is that the mature mind is the male mind rejecting his mother. Within Western culture, whenever the doors of perception open ever so little to let us catch a glimpse of the holographic cosmic mind within us, we are in danger of being locked up for psychiatric observation and given tranquilizers and other cures. The established patriarchal institutions all have a vested interest in keeping the individual mind disconnected from the experience of cosmic oneness, because this disconnection is patriarchy. So, what in the ancient times was experienced as our superconsciousness, within which we perceived the I, thou of the ego dissolving into the cosmic being of oneness, and whereby we received understanding, wisdom transcending dualism, magic perception, and healing powers, is now wholly submerged within us and turned the unconscious. So in what sense are we missing with this lost subconscious, this like submerged unconscious within all of us? What is being lost there in that translation of this patriarchy literally over the mind?
It's my understanding of it is that, the subconscious, of course, the intuition, all of that is inherently feminine, right? And so when we lose access to that, or when that is like put down, like, then we're losing access to so much more information and experience of life and understanding and wisdom. Like that's where part of where wisdom comes from. There's so much knowing and information there. And it's a different knowing than this kind of knowing, right? Like we feel, we sense, we dream, we have a premonition, whatever it is, or, we
feel something from the trees, and I do this because like there's my window, but right, like, and we feel something from the earth or the animals or something. We see a shift and we feel it in our body, and we know something from that, and we're so cut off from it now, and that makes it easier to control and to like instill fear and those kinds of things, you know, and like fear the darkness. The darkness is inherently feminine, right? Nighttime, the womb, like all of that dark goddess stuff. So I think when it comes to psychedelics, like the danger, quote unquote, of those, or like entheogens, if you want to say it, is that those help us to remember, right? Those things help us to remember.
I want to jump on here and say, like with where the talk is going now, with the taking of resources from the earth, to me, so my thought process might be discombobulated a little bit, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it. But the taking of resources is business mind. To me, that reflects business mind. And it's about, you know, gaining more, you know, and there's that business side of that, but it's also not taking into account the balance, the harmony that needs to remain to have, you know, sustainable earth, sustainable ways of living, sustainability is compromised. And a lot of that just continuous taking of resources. And with that, you know, what occurs to me is that it could have seemed like a great idea at one point within our history to do something like that. But the thing is that I feel that there's a really predominant theme of not being able to take accountability for our mistakes and seeing our mistakes when they are made. And that really creates a lot of guilt and shame and a not enoughness. And I feel like when people get into the spiral of guilt, shame, and not enoughness, that's the you know, the shadow work of like the world, the shadow side of the world. And so with that, I feel like that really does the ones that get the brunt of that is really the mother or the women that are representative of that mother. So that is just my ramblings of that thought process. Thank you.
I think a lot what is also part of this patriarchal matrix is language, and what I think that's also like the bridge between the conscious and the subconscious. Whenever we say something, a word, and you know, every culture has its own language and its own complexity. And I recently read a study that shows that depending on what your mother tongue is, your brain is being shaped by it. And I think these are all codes, right? Like right now, we also exchange codes through language. And what has helped me a lot is to just be more careful with my own language that I'm using. And for example, earlier you said we should ascend from Earth. That's like a very patriarchal. It rang my alarm bell in my room because the whole idea of going away and like the way church towers are built, like that's this. I know exactly what you meant with the ascension, but like I try to pay attention, just like I try to use pronouns for people And I try to pay attention to, even I stopped saying I'm getting high when I take psychedelics, because maybe I'm not getting high, I'm going in, or maybe I go sideways and maybe I transcend into my sister. I don't know. But like try to like kind of be reflective of how we use language and just the proximities of where we place things that are good, like away or, you know, from us. And it opens this whole very complicated thought that I don't know how to think alone, which is this whole, do we belong to Earth, or is the cosmos the great feminine force, or is it the core of the Earth? Like, it's really hard for me to think in these dimensions. Yeah, but that's maybe a bigger question for later.
Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing that. That was really super beautiful. And also a good reminder how words definitely are codes and the ways in which we speak, especially of the liminal. And connecting to that, I'd like to invite us just for a few minutes. There's a lot of people in the group that hasn't spoken. And I think we'll just do like 5 to 7 minutes in some breakout rooms for people to just speak a little bit more and speak around this concept. Like what could be achieved if we once again harnessed the unconscious mind or harness the liminal, or we're able to live more in those spaces. And Naoki might have like actually answered this for the whole group before, but anyway, let's work into those spaces a little bit for just a few minutes.
Oh, what happened?
What happened? Welcome back, everyone.
Oh,
Sorry if that was a rude awakening. Does anyone have any sharings they could bring back from their smaller groups?
Looks, is everyone back in?
Many are.
Many are.
Yes, everyone's back.
Okay, nice. I can share a little bit about some stuff that came up in my group. One thing I really loved that we talked about was instinct as a function of remembering, and how like tapping into our instinct, our intuition, and beginning to trust that is a way in which that we can like connect more with this like unconscious part of ourselves. And then yeah, something else that I was talking about was how like I am a seer. I see the other side, and I come from a lineage of seers, but my abuela and my bisabuela, who were seers, like ended up in psych wards, and the way that that seeing was institutionalized, you know, and called crazy, but how really like we all have this capacity to see and to be like aware of the interdimensional aspects of life. And so it's like this remembering of the magic and the mystical, I think is another way to do it. And yeah, and the like learning to trust ourselves and trust what we see and trust what we know and trust what it is that's arising, felt like a really important piece of what came from our group.
I think like what you said is pretty cool, because it's like you can institutionalize these people and cage them, but as long as like they give birth and like the ancestral line continues, like that institutionalization, like squeezing them so shut, like they've given birth to this child, you, who is completely open. You know what I mean? And so it's like you might even stifle one generation, but like the next generation will come stronger. Because you want to know, when you're institutionalized, you have so much time to think in there and like and build in that brain.
I'll say thank you. Any other wisdoms that came out of the small groups?
Could you repeat the question, Meta?
Just what we were, did you make it into a small group? Yeah, you want to repeat the question of what the small groups were talking about? Yeah. Well, we were working off, I can read the shorter version of the quote that we were kind of discussing. And it was, what in ancient times was experienced as our super consciousness, within which we perceived the I, thou of the ego dissolving into the cosmic being of oneness, and whereby we received understanding, wisdom transcending dualism, magic, perception, and healing powers, is now wholly submerged within us and termed the unconscious. So it's like the idea that these aspects in ancient times that were much more present have now been kind of repressed and are in the unconscious. And what we were talking about in the group was how we can kind of bring that out from the unconscious and back into our present consciousness. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It was not clear, the question for me. Sorry.
Did you guys still find stuff to talk about? Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, just like thinking about, I mean, there's a million ways how I think one of the ways that we are gonna do it is like finding the balancing again between the masculine and the feminine, or the whatever you want to call it, the two polarities of the world, of the becoming of the human being. And it's gonna take a whole village to work with our kids, work with, what cosmologies do we have in within our communities and within the different parts of the world that we are, and how are we going to bring balance back to evolve as as humanity, and evolve into whatever it is that we're going to become in the future. But just building that within ourselves, within our own families, and passing that on, um, and also unifying all of the different ways. The prophecy of the eagle and the condor talks about this a little bit, about how the north and the south, the feminine, the masculine, this polarity needs to work together once again to be able to flourish something, plant different seeds this time, for future generations. So, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff we can do. That's just one of them. Erika has her hand on.
Yeah, part of what I talked about is maybe that polarity is part of the patriarchy, and that thinking about gender more on a spectrum rather than just male and female. Obviously, the book was written a long time ago, and it's going to focus a lot on the biological aspect of male and female, but that part of that oneness, part of the sort of coming to this other cosmology is to start to think of gender in a whole new way, and that can expand everything for all of us.
Erica, that was a really beautiful way to put it. And it also touches on Naoki's comment earlier about the ways in which the patriarchy oppresses us.
Yeah.
Within all of these dualistic constructions. And so once we free ourselves from the patriarchy, we're freed from those dualistic polarities as well, which is also gender construction. Because they write in here about how the patriarchy loves a good dual construction. And so within that is like what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man. And it's so interesting you say this too, Erica, because in some of our other containers where we've been working in this book, it's really triggered some, I guess you place them there, they're Americans, but people that have really grown up in the certain gender battles of the American times right now. And so the very gendered language of this book is triggering to them, but it's actually doing the opposite. It's like we have to speak in these gendered ways to explain the current condition of the patriarchy in order to liberate it. So it's that trigger that almost they're getting lost in not being able to grasp that meaning, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I think it totally makes sense. Like and it's part of what's interesting about the book, right? They wrote it, when was it written? The 80s, and then updated, was it the late 80s, early 90s when it was last updated? So it was long before we were having this larger discussion, but it absolutely demonstrates like this is the language we have to use to talk about the patriarchy, because this is what the patriarchy created.
Mic drop.
I notice we've lost a lot of people on the call. I'm wondering if maybe we're feeling like ready to close for the evening, if there's any other last thoughts that want to be shared of what's on our hearts after this call.
I just have to say that the part about Wilhelm Reich and fascism was like mind blowing to me. Like it was so now. It was so what's happening in the United States and other countries right now that I couldn't even grasp that that it had been talked about by a Nazi in the 30s, and that they had it in the book in the 80s, and we're now experiencing it all again. Like that was amazing to me. So if you haven't read that chapter, like it's well worth that section to really like dig into what he wrote.
So much of history is really surfacing, including the ancient history of matriarchal culture and religions, or really spirituality before patriarchy took hold, still in ancient times, quote unquote. But it's really, I mean, it's astonishing. Like what Erica was just saying, it's astonishing. I mean, like all you had to do is remember your history to be floored by what's taking place right now, right? And also, transgender, like the whole LGBTQ community, like that community is ancient as well. And maybe it was more subversive, especially here in the United States for a long time, but no. But our friends, they haven't gone anywhere. They've always been here with us. And now that we're getting to have bigger conversations, it's like those conversations have been going on, kind of more under the radar for a long time. So I just feel like, that it also gives us a hope for things like that whole binary polarity stuff to be more unpacked, and for us to realize there's so much space between this and that, right? There's so much more. Thank you all for creating this group.
Thank you all for coming. Genuinely. There's a lot of work that can be done by reading these codes together, just like happened tonight, and we'll continue to go deeper and pull back the layers as we start to get to know each other better and also start to get a handle of this text. But wow, it was really, really beautiful working with all of you into these pieces tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.